Good evening. Welcome to Recovering Grapes. I want to take a little time before we get into our actual study this evening to remind you that what we're doing here in this series is describing recovery in terms of Alcoholics Anonymous 12 steps. Now, recovery needs to be understood in a broader sense than it's normally used. Normally, when we think about recovery, we immediately think about giving up alcohol, drugs, other life controlling substances of sorts. And typically, when we talk about recovery, we measure our recovery in terms of how long has it been since you last got drunk? When was your last drink? How long has it been since you got high? In other words, we measure recovery in terms of abstinence from the dysfunctional behavior of drug addiction or alcoholism. But that's really not recovery. That's not what we mean when we talk the word recovery. When we speak that word, what we're really talking about is a brand new lifestyle, a brand new way of living. And I can't think of anything better to describe that new lifestyle in a concrete, tangible, very practical way than the 12 steps of AA. It is a new lifestyle that requires a radical change on the inside. It's a new lifestyle that requires a new power, a new source of strength, a new lifestyle that's characterized by a new way of thinking. And it's a radically different lifestyle from the typical lifestyle we're all born into, whether we're alcoholics or addicts or not. We all are born into a dysfunctional lifestyle. Now, the reason I say that is because, as you know, God's expectation for the human race was clearly revealed in the person of his son, Jesus. Jesus Christ is what a human being ought to look like as far as God is concerned. Jesus Christ is the standard. And obviously, as all of us have to admit, we fall short of that standard. Jesus is up here and we are somewhere down below. Recovery means not that we try to get ourselves up to his standard, but recovery is a gift that God gives us, whereby he raises us up to match his standard in his son Jesus. And it's a marvelous lifestyle, an exciting lifestyle. And I want us to continue to study that tonight as we take a real important step in the 12 steps of AA. We're going into step 8. Now, for those of you that don't know what that is, we've got it on the screen here. It simply says, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Now, you can see it would take a little work to get to step 8. As a matter of fact, there are 7 steps prior to this because we would get stuck. If we didn't do those other steps, we'd get stuck at this point. Made a list of all persons we had harmed. I haven't hurt anybody. I've never harmed anybody by the things I've done. Even I've heard addicts and alcoholics say, well, the only person I'm really hurting is myself. That's the only person. I'm not really hurting anybody else. You see, unless we come to grips with that very first step, admitting we are powerless, that our lives have become unmanageable, and we're willing to take step 2, and that is come to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity, and follow up with step 3, turning our will and our life over to the care of God as we understand him. We're not able to in any way recognize that we've harmed anybody. It's only when we get that new spiritual awakening that we begin to see. And our first vision, unfortunately, is a little difficult. We've looked at that in the last 4 steps. In step 4, we made a fearless, searching, moral inventory of ourselves. and we looked at all our character defects. We got honest with God, ourselves, and in step 5, another human being. Step 6, we were entirely ready to have God do for us what we couldn't do for ourselves, to actually change us, to get rid of those shortcomings, to cleanse us, to remove those character defects and replace them with a new identity. Step 7, as we studied last week, we humbly ask Him to do so. Now, having accomplished those 7 steps, we're now ready to turn the relational corner. What do I mean by turn the relational corner? Well, Christianity and your relationship with God is really, and by the way, that's what Christianity is. It's a relationship, not a religion. And so your relationship with God is what I refer to as a vertical relationship. It's strictly between you and your God. That vertical relationship has been established in the first 3 steps of this series. Then you begin to have a relationship with yourself. As most people struggle with their own identity and their own sense of worth and value as a person, and then you have to come to grips with who you are. Steps 4 through 7 puts us right in the very heat of that self-analysis, and we begin to develop a relationship with ourselves that is hopeful, hoping that God will in fact remove those character defects, hoping that God will in fact work in us miraculously to make us a brand new person. Now, having established that vertical relationship between us and God, we are ready to turn the corner and concern our relationship between ourselves and everyone else around us. So the relationship between you and others now is equally as important. The Bible makes no mistake about this. It is equally as important as your relationship to God. As a matter of fact, as John points out in this first general letter, it's impossible for us to say that we love God when we hate our brother. And if you take a quick review, if you did a healthy 4th step, and you take a quick review of all those resentments that mounted up, you'll have to come to grips with the fact that, yes, I resented and hated my brother, other people around me. And so that, in order to maintain that vertical relationship with God, we're going to have to relate to each other. The simple way to remember it is the way you relate to other people is a mirror image of how you relate to God. Now, we're going to talk more about that a little later on, but tonight I want us to focus on the application of this principle to step 8, to making a list of all the persons we've harmed and becoming willing to make amends to them all. In other words, we're not leaving anybody out of the equation. Now, the big book spends quite a bit of time emphasizing the importance of this step. As a matter of fact, there are several warnings in the pages concerning this step that suggest that a failure to turn that relational corner and start looking at your relationships to others honestly and start changing your thinking towards that so that you're willing to make amends, a failure to do so usually puts us back into dysfunctional behavior. For an alcoholic, obviously, it's going to be back into his alcoholism. For a drug addict, back into drug addiction. But also for other dysfunctions, we're right back into it. Sexual addiction, food addiction, you name it. Unless we learn to relate to others. Now, I want to tie another general idea into this, and that is why God has left us here. That's why God put man on the face of this earth to begin with. He wants us to display his character of love to other people around us. That's our purpose. That's our ministry. That's why we are here. It's no different for an alcoholic or an addict than it is anyone else. It's no different for a religious addict or a sex addict than it is anyone else. The reason you're here is not to feel good have a wonderful, successful life and go on vacation. The reason you're here is to be used of God to be of maximum service to others. In other words, to love others, just like Jesus did. That's our purpose. Now, when we talk about turning the relational corner, then, when we step out on step 8, we're not making a list of all the people we've hurt and become willing to make amends to them all for our sake. We don't need it. We don't need to do it just for our sake. In other words, our focus of our attention has to switch now from us, everything about me, to others, because this is a marvelous transformation that God does. When He removes those character defects, when He removes those shortcomings and sins of the flesh, He does so by displacing them with the character of Christ, which is all about loving others. So this transformation I'm talking about in step 8 is a transformation between being a self-centered, totally selfish, self-absorbed taker, being transformed miraculously by God into a compassionate, loving giver. It's a radically different lifestyle than anyone's lived before. No human being naturally lives that lifestyle. You see, it's a supernatural lifestyle, empowered by God Himself to make us a brand new person capable of loving others. And so if we've done our previous work thoroughly, and we've made that fearless moral inventory and did a 5th step, and we were entirely ready to have God cleanse us, and we ask Him humbly to do so, now we turn the relational corner. Our focus is no longer on us. What about me? Our focus is on, what about other people? What about the people that put up with me? What about the people that I've harmed and hurt? What about the people that I've neglected? You see, we can harm people not just overtly and directly, but we can hurt them by neglecting to minister to them. So now we've got to turn and face the reality of why we're really here. We're really here to love those people. We're really here to care about those people. Step 8 is a beginning point. Now, a couple other things I want to mention before I bring the panel in here. 8th step is, when we turn this relational corner, is something that we've already done in a sense back in the 4th step. We made a list of people that we'd hurt. Now, it may not be a complete list. It may not be an exhaustive list, depending on the type of step 4 you did, but it's a beginning. It's a place. You see, when your eyes are open to the reality of your own dysfunctional behavior and the consequences of that behavior relationally, when your eyes are open to that, as God enlightens you to that, you begin to see where you have hurt people. Now, I know this tends to fly in the face of the gospel in this regard. Yes, we are still brand new persons created in Christ Jesus. That's what gave us the courage to do that fearless moral inventory. Yes, we are a brand new creation created in Christ Jesus. But yes, we still have the flesh. And that flesh has hurt people, and we must live with those consequences. You see, being a new person in Christ doesn't immediately remove all the consequences of your behavior, past or present. And so when we do step 8, what we're actually doing is we are taking a courageous step in trying our best to let God lead us to make amends, to love other people, especially those we have harmed. Now, if you're like I am and you come to grips with somebody that you said something wrong, or you did something harmful to them, or you perhaps neglected them. I remember one time I had an aunt, and she's gone to be with the Lord, but in my religiosity as a religious addict, as a Pharisee of Pharisees. I had told her one time, as a pastor of a little old church that she attended, I told her because she was not a member in good standing that she could not receive the Lord's Supper. And that just communion, and that just bugged me and bugged me and bugged me until I finally made amends with her. I told her point blank I was wrong, and I wasn't doing it to get her approval. She approved of me anyhow. I was doing it to get it off my chest, to actually allow me the freedom to be able to have a relationship with her and love her. So when we make amends, we're not just doing it for ourselves, but we're doing it for others as well. Likewise, we're not doing it for others, we're doing it for ourselves as well. The two go hand in glove together because there are relational, that takes two, a relational process that we're entering into. Now, the other thing I want to say before I quit here this evening is that in the narrative of the big book, they make it seem like it's imperative that we do this step, or we're going to go right back into our dysfunction. But let me kind of temper that just a little bit with you. Yes, it is important. No, there's no question about it. But people are not naturally able to turn that relationally corner without being skilled. To turn that corner takes some personal skills that need to be developed on your part. And the class that Tom and Bill and Pam are doing on Thursday evening, called Relational Empowerment, they've mentioned these skills and some of the things that are necessary to be able to develop healthy relationships. And I want to just quickly remind you of these. I have identified 4 personal skills that are essential when we get ready to turn this relational corner and should be brought into the 8th step as well. Some of them are inferred if you actually read the narrative of the big book as it describes steps 8 and 9. You'll see a lot of these personal skills inferred, even though they're not using this particular terminology. The first skill I refer to is cognitive restructuring. As being that worthless, no good, less than others person, you think of yourself as a brand new person. You understand your needs are met and that you're worthy. Along with that skill comes the emotional management, where you learn to control your emotions rather than having your feelings control you. A third skill I call behavioral redirection. That's just simply you honestly admit your false motives, fear, guilt, and pride, and replace them with true motives of faith, hope, and love brought to you by the Spirit. But above all, the personal skills, and the Big Book does talk about this a little bit in this section, and that is spiritual enlightenment. You see, especially in step 9, but here also in step 8, we have to have the enlightenment of the indwelling Spirit. He has to open our eyes so we understand who it is we've hurt, so we and can identify who it is we need to be willing to make amends with. That spiritual enlightenment is absolutely essential because remember, this is God working his life in you in a new lifestyle, not just simply abstinence from dysfunctional behavior. Now, I've covered a lot of ground here, so I want to bring the panel in to add their thoughts and to entertain any questions you have. Let me, while, excuse me, Bill's bringing them in, let me just mention to you who are listening to us that if anybody's got a question or anything that's confusing to them, simply text us here or you can contact us later and we'd be happy to try to address those questions for you. So here we are at the 8th step. Now, before we started this evening, David said that in every step, there's a prayer associated with it. And I'd like for him to read the big book prayer for step 8 and then to give us his take on the step. David?
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of what we're doing here. So, and as in all the steps, there are prayers in the book, big book about Alcoholics Anonymous. They're not pulled out and identified clearly. You have to kind of look for them. Anyways, and it goes on with the 8. It says, God, I ask you to help me in making my list of all those I have harmed. I will take responsibility for my mistakes and be forgiving to others as you are forgiving to me. Grant me the willingness to begin my restitution. This I pray. That's how I depicted it out of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So my experience with this step is pretty powerful in the after, doing the steps leading up to this and basically cleaning out the wreckage of my own life, and then getting to the relational corner, turning the corner. The reality of the people I have hurt becomes more and more clear because the resentments and fears start to die, and the reality of my actions while drinking and drugging, the selfish and self-centeredness of that blinded me from seeing the deep harm I was causing those close to me and those associated in work and just people I associated with, my actions, my attitudes, and everything else. So the more, and to go on to say that, working the steps once for me is not how I have gotten greater work in my life. Is associated with continuing to look at these steps, continuing. And even the work we're doing right now, the classes we're putting on are opening my eyes to stuff I never really saw before. And again, I could justify that, or my flesh justifies that by the resentment what other people did, and I had a right to hold a grudge, and that blinded me from seeing my true motives and my true actions, and in my relationship with others. And have harmed in the past lots of people through the selfish and self-centeredness. So this, and as John put it, I mean, in reference to his aunt and what he did, it's definitely a two-way street. I mean, and you can, the freedom in being able to go anywhere and anytime, wherever you go, and not be in fear of running into somebody that you did something wrong to, or offended, or took money from, or whatever the case may be. It's a liberty and a freedom that's just beyond description when you can do that. And it's a powerful step. And I'm not one to sit here and say I've completed it. I have not completed it. So thank you for giving me time to talk.
Yeah, that's an important point you make. 2 points there, David. Number one, and I think all of us can agree with this. Number one, we are all so wrapped around the axle about being right, no matter what the issue is, that we got to be right because it's tied into our personal needs, that we don't even think about other people, naturally. And that causes a lot of offenses we're not even aware of until the Lord opens our eyes to it. And it is a process. And that's the second point, that, you like you said, you're still doing step 8. Well, we're all still doing all 12 steps. And it is a process. It's not just a simple event there. That's done. It's over with. But those are 2 important points I think we need to bring out. Tom, let's jump over to you and entertain whatever thoughts you've got on it.
Well, first, I'll tell our audience that if you're having difficulty with the audio, we're having a rainstorm out here in Okeechobee that's affecting John and David and I. And it seems like the only time we get a good rain is on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. So we'll take it. And we apologize for that. But, if you do the math on the 12 steps, you'll note that, 5 of the 12 steps, steps 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, are all in some way relational in nature. So that's 42% of the 12 steps, or, pushing half. And it shows you how important these relational steps are. In my experience dealing with a lot of guys in recovery programs over the years, I've seen that relational issues represent one of the biggest challenges of recovery and maintaining recovery. In other words, nothing will set you back more than relational challenges. And unfortunately, my old coping strategy was, if I could just find a cabin in the woods somewhere where I didn't have to relate to anybody, I would recover nicely. And that's just not the way life works. Everybody has at least 2 or 3 people that represent, perhaps 90% of their relational challenges. And let's face it, we're stuck with them. So changing scenery or changing relationships is not the answer to the problem, because there'll be new relationships that will be equally challenging. In regard to making your list, I will say, and hear me out on this, don't think that I'm contradicting what John's saying, that I think it's really important to put yourself at the top of that list. And I'm not talking about being selfish. What I'm talking about is, John mentioned that the way we relate to others is a mirror image of how we relate to God. And unless we can agree with God about ourselves and see ourselves the way God sees us, rather than see ourselves as guilty or to see ourselves as ashamed, shame-based thinking, or being in fear. So if we're motivated by fear, guilt, and pride, we're never going to be able to move forward and successfully be able to relate to others. So we have to agree with God on what He says is true about us, and that creates the relationship with Him that gives us the empowerment to develop all those skills that John was talking about, to be able to relate to other people. Finally, I think fear of rejection is probably one of the biggest things, because in making amends, you can't control how other people are going to react or respond. And if you have harmed them, they're going to be very skeptical. And it's really nice when people receive you in open arms and they do, forgive you. But in those cases where you may not receive that response, that rejection is potentially going to be a setback for you, unless you have developed a real strong toolbox full of those skills that John was talking about. So I'll leave my comments there and let somebody else chime in.
Okay. All right, thank you, Tom. A real important point there that you just made, and that is, step 8 is not making amends. Step 8 is being willing to make amends. And of course, the biggest obstacle to being willing to make amends is our own fear of failure, our own fear of rejection. What if I try to make amends and this person eats me alive? Whatever the fear may be. And so we've got to overcome that fear with faith that this is exactly what God wants us to do. The spiritual enlightenment we were talking about. Bill, let's flip over to you on step 8.
Yeah, I like what you said about this isn't for you. That this isn't, you're not doing this for you, and that you don't need it. Richard Rohr points out in his book that you're actually becoming a healer, and that you're turning the corner, and this connection that you're going to make with the person that you hurt is for their healing, and it's a win-win situation, really. And I'm talking to people, and I know that when I had to make my amends, you're making yourself vulnerable, and you're afraid that that person's going to reject you. Okay? So that's why I really believe in step 8, as you're making your list, God's going to lead you. The Holy Spirit's going to lead you to names and which people that you need to make amends with. And I like the fact that if you've been running an addiction, you've probably had a list running in your mind of people that hurt you, and that list is ongoing and running in your mind. You deal with that in step 4. This is a reversal. Reversal that now you're making a list of the people that you harm. You're seeing things more clearly. When you're running an addiction, you're narcissistic, you're self-centered, and you're off. We're hurting people we don't even realize sometimes the pain that we're inflicting. And a lot of times I reflect it to me that when I do get sober, when I do have a moment of clarity, right away I think of all the people that I hurt, and the downward spiral again, guilt, anger. But as you deal with God and receive His forgiveness, that guilt is lifted. You're not going to this person to get, to get this guilt off your shoulders. The guilt and the shame needs to be dealt with through God. So I've seen where people they've gone to make amends in the sense that I got to get this off my chest, or I got to get rid of this guilt. And sometimes it backfires because the person rejects them, and they're hurt again, and they lash out, and the cycle goes around and around. So we're becoming, in this sense, we've experienced that forgiveness, we've experienced that healing, and now we see that there's this other part of our life. And I like what Dave said: you don't have to look over your shoulder, you don't have to be afraid of running into people that you've heard in the supermarket. You've gone to them, you've dealt with it, and that's getting a little ahead of it in step 9. But I really believe that a crucial part in step 8 is really letting God lead you. I remember one situation. I heard that someone was mad at me, and they were expecting an apology, and I thought about it, and I actually went to other people involved. It was a church situation, and it was left there where this person needs to come to you, Bill. And so I really believe that God needs to lead it and guide it, and that relational end of it, that you're restoring relationships. And we have a little saying in our family: forgiveness is the way out of most of our messes, and if not all of them. Right? We hurt each other, we step on each other's toes, we hurt each other's feelings, we lash out, and we hurt each other. And it can get real sticky if we have an ongoing list of those that hurt us, instead of rather seeking to make amends and applying that forgiveness. And God's given us a beautiful, beautiful gift of forgiveness in Jesus Christ. His forgiveness is full and free and unconditional and eternal. And when we receive that, it empowers us. And I've seen situations where I've sought to make amends and apologize to people. One time I'll give you one little example. And this was kind of, I think, step 10, all the steps are involved. So this was kind of an 8th and 9th step. I was in Publix one time, and I had I guess I had more than 10 things in my cart, and the cashier pointed it out. And I was sarcastic, but I after it happened, I realized I came across really horrible, rude. I said, oh yeah, because there was nobody behind me, nobody in line. I said, oh yeah, with this big line that's there, I I better go, you know, like I made some comment that there's no one behind me. What's your problem, right? So later on in the day, I thought about it and thought, you know, that was unfair. I wasn't nice. And I prayed about it. I said, Lord, if, you know, you want me to make amends. And the next time I went, her line was empty. And I apologized to her. And I asked her if she remembered. And she said, yeah, she remembered. And she kind of got kind of choked up. And she smiled. And I told her I was really sorry. And I saw that it was healing in her life, you know, for whatever reason. When we love and respect each other and we show each other love and respect, we become healers. We become wounded healers, phrase by Wayne Lumlow. So I'll leave it. That's all I'll say for now. Let Pam, throw it over to Pam, John, or.
Okay. Well, I appreciate what you had to say, Bill, that, you know, the thing that impresses me likewise to step 8 is that willingness to make amends. And that's a big step, man. When you stop and think about how willing we are to be right all the time and never to admit that we've screwed up or we've made a mistake or much less hurt somebody, you know, to come to the point where you're willing to make amends with someone is an amazing spiritual awakening. So, Pam, we're going to go over to you now and have you wrap us up here tonight.
Thank you. I'm beginning to consider breathing underwater the 12 and 12 for Christians. In AA, we have a book called The 12 and 12 that describes it more in detail about the steps. And I am just struck every time I go through this with step and I look to see what Henry Nouwen has to say about it. One of the first things that he did was he quoted Einstein as having said that you cannot fix a situation with the same consciousness that caused the problem in the first place. And I think the first 7 steps are all about changing that consciousness. He also Richard Rohr also states that it is self-serving. It is a self-serving concern to alleviate just your own guilt. It is a loving question to say, how can I free others? And once I got a picture, and it took a long time, but once I got a picture that the power of doing your 9th step, which we'll talk about next week, but becoming willing, one of the motivators to be willing is to recognize that in doing so, what I'm really doing is freeing another person from their resentment towards me. And the power of being able to do that is so redemptive. I believe that being willing to make amends, when we do our 7th step, we come up, our 5th step, our 4th and 5th step, we come up with that list. Until we put that into actual practice, to not just say, yes, I did it, but to actually fix the situation. One of the main things that my sponsor pointed out to me when I started looking at step 8 was that I was not just becoming willing to say I was sorry. My sponsor used to have a wonderful little saying she'd use on me regularly when I'd say something about saying I was sorry. And she'd say, Pam, they already know how sorry you are. What they want to know is, what are you going to do about it? And that kind of helped me to put things in perspective. This was when the Big Book uses the term amend, they're talking about fixing it, mending it. That this is not just simply a matter of saying I'm sorry, but doing as best as we are able on our side. Obviously, the other person always has a choice. Always. God gives us both parties freedom of choice. But insofar as I am capable, I move in to free that person of their resentment towards me. Technically, in steps 4 and 5, I will have made great strides in freeing myself of resentment toward them by looking for my part in it and owning my part in it. But that doesn't do anything to heal or free the other person. What could be more like Jesus? What could be more like Jesus than to actually be willing to free the other person? I loved it that you talked about in the beginning, John, that abstinence is not recovery. That is one of the main things that I stress to people. It's in a 12-step program, we celebrate abstinence, but recovery is the goal. My favorite way of expressing it is to say that abstinence is the entrance fee that I have to pay. I cannot, and by the way, I tried. I decided that I was going to go to Al-Anon and work my 12 steps and keep drinking, because after all, they work the same 12 steps as AA. So, hey, that would do it, right? Wrong. Wrong. That didn't work. I had to pay the entrance fee of abstinence. That's all it is. It's the entrance fee. When I talk about freeing other people, I was looking for it when everybody else was sharing, and I can't find it. I know Philip Yancey put it in his book, What's So Amazing About Grace, which is one of my other all-time most favorite books. But it's not his quote, it's somebody else's, and I don't know who. And if somebody else knows, please chime in. But Yancey uses in that book the quote, "Forgiveness is love practiced among people who love poorly." And I was just like, yes, forgiveness is love practiced among people who love poorly. Last and not the least thing I want to say about this step is that, as you pointed out, it is about becoming willing. The way I like to teach that word is, if I say I'm coming to your house, I'm not there yet. I am willing. It's also important to me to note, always, always, always to note, that willingness is not a feeling, it's a choice. Step 8 says, I did not get to the place where I felt like it. It says I became willing. It's a choice that I make. And I make that choice after having changed that mindset that I want not to disagree, but to just add to. One of the biggest blocks from becoming willing in my experience is self-justification. It's self-justification. I have a right to this. And probably one of the biggest hurdles I've faced as a therapist with people is the difference between traditional therapy, which frequently emphasizes what your rights are, and a Christian worldview that says, and I will never forget, John, you're the one who said it to me first, that I have to know what my rights are before I can freely choose to lay them down, because God is asking me to. I have to know what they are. But that's not the end of the story. Again, to quote Richard Rohr, he talks about the geometry of the cross, that not only is it horizontal, but it's vertical. And he calls that the geometry of the cross. That's it.
I like that.
Thanks.
I like that, ma'am. Thanks.
Good.
Yeah, that vertical relationship, the way God loves us, we love him, expressed in the horizontal relationship, the way we love others. And you made a point, Pam, that I want to emphasize on, because we'll develop it more next week when we look at the 9th step. But the point was that when you are able to free someone of their resentment, like the way you presented that, you're actually being Christ.
Yes.
In other words,
Mhm.
to me, that's one of the most fundamental aspects of us being Christ to others, is to free them from the baggage that they're carrying around in that resentment. Because as you well know, anybody that hurts us in any way, disappoints us, much less abuses us, or God forbid, rips us off somehow financially, we might say, oh, I'm angry with them for about 30 seconds, and we're going to hate their guts. And we're going to carry that hatred with us, festering in us, regardless. And so people that we've hurt, we've got to realize they're struggling. And as we'll get into it next week more in depth, when we talk about step 9, those people we're going to make amends with, they're hurting, they're struggling. They're doing it's everything they can. For instance, for a wife of an alcoholic or a drug addict, not to bash his head in as soon as he gets out of the program and comes home and tries to take over again. She's been hurt bad. So and there's undoubtedly a ton of resentment there that has to be freed up, that she's struggled with and she's trying to get free of. And if we do step 8, we're willing to make amends, we've got to look at those types of scenarios, those types of people that, and I think the most miraculous thing about step 8 to me is we get out of ourselves and we start using the eyes of Jesus to look at other people. And we can actually see what we've done to them and how we've hurt them, so that we can be willing to make those amends. So there's a lot more to come. Unfortunately, we run out of time every. We just barely scratched the surface. I feel a little bit like those talking heads on the news stations, where they just bring the issue up and drop it and have a commercial and go on to something else. But I appreciate each one of you participating tonight. I appreciate all the people listening to us, and appreciate you staying with it. Step 9, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be an exciting discussion next week. So I'm going to turn it back to Bill to have him wrap us up.
All right. I just, we're going to look at some of the comments.
I saw Candy had a question, Bill. Did you see that?
Nancy Wood, she made a good comment that you can't have expectations on people will react to your amends. And what I like to do, just real quick, to tie this in with with the gospel in the Alpha series, which we do a lot in recovery, is to put it in the language. Don't make it a worth issue. You have to be at the top of the Solomon syndrome chart. And that's a good little exercise after you make your list, is to make sure that you're not at the bottom and that your false assumption is, I will be worthy if I could get so-and-so's forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, you're set up for failure. Instead, you know your worth, you know that you're forgiven, you know that you have all the riches of Christ and that you're okay. And for the emphasis, as John pointed out, is you're looking to go love that other person. So that's where I really believe the Alpha series ties in good with that, is on identity and worth issues. We can't make it that. We can't do it that way.
Exactly.
So
Candy had a question, Bill.
Candy said that the last two that you broke up, I think she.
I think that was relational skills.
Cognitive redirection, spiritual enlightenment, emotional management, and behavioral redirection. I think she missed two of those.
Yeah, the first two, Candy, are cognitive restructuring, the way you think about yourself. To believe the gospel, the good news about yourself, rather than all the lies about you being worthless. The second one is emotional management. In other words, learning to control your feelings rather than allowing your feelings to control you.
It's breaking up again.
Now, I don't know what's happening with the picture. It keeps going off on my end here, but I trust you heard that.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill.
So
I've got a comment here on my watch party. Suzanne Campbell says she loves the quote on forgiveness. She says, can I write it? I don't know how to do that, but I can repeat it. And that is that forgiveness is love practiced among people who love poorly. I might Google it or something and try and find out who said it. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be quoting it if I give credit where credit's due, but it wasn't me.
we know Sandy's out there, Nancy,
right.
Pam, Sherry, Tammy, Wendy, Grandma's out there, the whole cast clan, Angela. I know that Angela started a watch party too. Mary. And I think that's it. Some people are repeating. So John, you want to wrap it up and tell everybody good night? And Thursday night, we'll be back with relational empowerment class. We're going to talk about communication and talk about speaking the truth in love, right? Which I think is real important personally, and we can do that nationally too. Speaking the truth in love.
Yeah. My quote was by Henry Nouwen.
Henry Nouwen.
Yeah.
All right.
He also describes us as wounded healers, another one of my favorite books.
Yeah. That wounded healer, that's been, Wayne Momblow wrote a book, You Don't Find Water on the Mountaintop. And he uses that term too. I wonder where it originated. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tune in on Thursday night, same place, same Grace channel, 7 p.m. Relational Empowerment. Tom, you got Cowboy Church going on Sunday mornings, right?
Yep.
And then Sunday, Freedom Ranch up and running. For those that are Reach Community Church, you're in transition. Causeway Cove is the place, unless the weather. Dave usually makes the call by 6 p.m. Saturday as he watches the weather. And so just be ready for that. So again, thanks everyone for joining in, and go make your list. Go do it.
Jesus.